After we finished our business at the student council, I walked back to the school gate with Nanami Toko. I feel like I'm going to get lost until I learn my way around here, I murmured. Me too. Nanami Toko turned around. I'll call you if I get lost. So make sure to come and rescue me, okay? I gave a snort of laughter at Nanami Toko's joke. Unfortunately, I generally don't answer calls unless I recognize the phone number. Oh, right. We haven't exchanged numbers yet. Nanami Toko pulled out her phone and showed it to me. A little flustered, I retrieved my phone from my bag as well. Under the faint sunlight streaming through the trees, alongside the shadows that wavered with the wind, our fingers and voices crossed. As I showed her the phone number I'd finished entering, Nanami Toko smiled. Now will be a number you recognize. I'll definitely come and rescue you then. I was sure I would come running right away, though I hoped she wouldn't notice I was out of breath when it happened. When we reached the gate, we heard the lively voices of the other students who had finished with their clubs. Bicycles weaved through the crowd, and people's shadows spread across the ground like water. Nanami Toko and I added to the pool of shadows. The stark silhouette of her head swam unreliably, wavering with her long hair. Which way is your house, Saeki-san? She gestured to the right and left. I pointed at the same time as Nanami Toko, in the exact opposite directions. Looks like we're headed opposite ways. Right. Oh well. We parted, and I headed toward home. It took a while before the pounding on my heart was overtaken by the sound of my footsteps. I commuted by train when I was a junior high, and I'd lied to my parents that I'd come to dislike doing so. But now that I had started walking home instead, it was a lot easier than I thought it would be. Maybe it wasn't really that much of a lie, after all. Arriving home, I wondered how Nanami Toko would respond if she were to see the elegant gate and outer wall, such a stark contrast to the run-down student council. Thinking back to her reactions, she might actually be more excited about the cats. I heard one of those very cats meow, and peeked into the shadow of the gate's pillar. The tortoiseshell cat was curled up there, as though carrying the shadow on its back. It noticed me, and our eyes met. I'm home. When I greeted it, it slowly got up and headed towards the garden. Though we had two cats, I rarely saw them together. It seemed they each had their own lives, in which they did not fight or meddle with each other. I wondered if the only commonality between them was their fondness for my grandparents, who looked after them. After I followed the cat for a while, I found my grandmother in the garden. It really did bear a resemblance to the tree-lined road to the student council room. Hello, I'm home. When I greeted her, my grandmother gave me a curt nod. She stooped to pick up the cat that approached her, staggering a little as she straightened. My grandmother's back and posture hadn't ever weakened before, but lately she had been starting to show her age a little. However, her sharp voice and attitude were still going strong. Was school fun? Yeah. Was it showing on my face that much? When she guessed that much just from the slight greeting I had given her, I started to feel embarrassed. Evidently, though, that wasn't what my grandmother had been looking at. I could tell from the way you were moving. The way I was moving? When I found out that it wasn't my face, I checked my elbows and knees instead. You were moving as though you were motivated. And just like that, My grandmother left with the cat, not bothering to tell me whether it was a good or bad thing. Motivated, I muttered to myself as I moved my arms up and down. I didn't feel like I was moving particularly faster. And here I thought I was already living a fairly motivated life. My grandmother's statements were often unique and occasionally difficult to follow. But if she was saying that, I trusted that there was a note of truth to it. Perhaps my meeting Nanami Toko was such a strong motivator that even people observing from the sidelines could see it. I hoped that Nanami Toko herself couldn't see through that, though. At any rate, I decided to apply that motivation towards the student council for the time being. Until I knew what Nanami Toko sought from the student council, my path ahead was clear. After a week went by, social groups had more or less formed within the class. As though we were drawn to each other by some affinity, I ended up eating with two friends during lunch. It was odd, considering that our seats were not currently near each other, according to Japanese alphabetical order. Whoa! Your leftovers from yesterday look so pretty packed in there. Isn't that a little too much cognac? No one at home really likes it, so it all ends up as leftovers. Then why even make it for dinner in the first place? Whether chatting or poking fun at one another, my friends harmonized together well. Yoshida Manaka and Igarashi Midori. Yoshida-san was the one with too much cognac, and Igarashi-san was the one who had none. Yoshida-san was cheerful, to the point where her remarks were so distinctive that I was beginning to suspect that she didn't really think before she talked. Igarashi-san was often exaggerated with Yoshida-san for this reason, but they were generally always together during lunch breaks. They got along very well, and it seemed to me as though they were very close friends, so I assumed perhaps they had known each other a long time. Were you together in junior high? I asked. The pair looked at each other. Not at all. We only met after getting to high school. Really? It didn't seem that way to me at all. I suppose they were just a natural match. I guess that knowing someone for a long time doesn't automatically mean you'll get along that much better then. So maybe the opposite is true. Like when two streams converge and mingle immediately. Other kids have asked us that too. Does it really seem like we've known each other that long? When Yoshida-san tried getting confirmation, Igarashi-san's eyes wandered away for a moment. Maybe we seem close to other people because you have zero filter. Well, it can't be a bad thing that people think we're friends, right? Yoshida-san said lightly and started poking at her cognac with her chopsticks. Igarashi-san glanced at Yoshida-san and returned to the earlier topic. What was it again? Right, we had been talking about the clubs we were joining. So, I was thinking about joining that one English conversation club. Whoa, conversation, Yoshida-san interjected, with a characteristic loudmouth drawl. I'd never had friends with a personality like hers before, so when Yoshida-san spoke, I sometimes didn't know how to react. Igarashi-san didn't bother engaging with her response. If I'm going to join a club anyway, I thought I might as well join one like that. There's no point joining a sports team, since it's not like I'm going to become a pro anyway. You think so? But if you exercise enough, you'll be ready if something happens, and you need to make a quick getaway. What exactly would I be running from? Well, let me see. Yoshida-san's chopsticks paused, and she clutched her head in a serious contemplation. Igarashi-san's eyes narrowed. Never mind, Dad. Oh, okay. Yoshida-san readily abandoned her bewilderment. I kept eating while the two of them talked, occasionally nodding along in agreement. In that time, Igarashi-san picked up a piece of Yoshida-san's konyako with a look of faint confusion. What are you talking about? It's delicious. Sayaka, do you have any major dislikes? Unable to think of a comeback, Yoshida-san turned the conversation to me. When Yoshida-san first asked me my name, she started using my first name within 3 minutes of conversation. Igarashi-san had followed suit and started calling me Sayaka too. Maybe they became so close because that sense of camaraderie was a given for them. Putting that aside, things I dislike. Questions like that, I was tempted to answer. Let me think. For a moment, I thought of the face of my senpai from junior high school days. A bitter taste grew at the back of my mouth. Irresponsible people, perhaps. I see. So people like me. For some reason, she snickered like she was proud of herself. So you have some self-awareness? I guess. Igarashi-san's words didn't seem to faze her. She merrily resumed eating, as though all her worries had been resolved. I wonder what she decided she might be running from in the end. Me, maybe. The sound of the classroom door opening drew my attention, and when I looked over, my legs froze under my desk. Nanami Toko was there. She had just come into the classroom, looking as though she had finished wrapping up some business. Just as she was about to return to her seat, Yoshida-san turned to her. Why don't you eat with us too, Toko? I was worried that my surprise might reveal itself on my face. I narrowly swallowed my voice before an exclamation of surprise escaped. Yoshida-san had airily, almost flippantly, called out to stop Nanami Toko. On top of that, she even used the other girl's first name. Nanami Toko didn't seem bothered by it, and she came over to us. Though I knew this was just Yoshida-san's personality, I was still surprised that she acted that way, even with Nanami Toko. Alright, but I'm not sure where to sit. Nanami Toko glanced around. There were no empty seats nearby whatsoever, and her own chair was a little too far away to drag over. Our eyes met. When she gave me a sheepish smile, I worried a little that my face might turn red. Oh, then how about we do this? Yoshida-san spoke up as though she had struck upon a particularly good idea. So Igarashi-san and I looked on with trepidation. Yoshida-san stood from her seat and started pushing on Igarashi-san's shoulder. As Igarashi-san scolded and said, Excuse me, what are you doing? Yoshida-san pushed the girl part way out of her seat and fit herself in the remaining half. Okay, we got an open seat for you now. She presented the seat that she had been sitting in up until that moment to Nanami Toko. Are you sure? Yeah, it's kind of fun. No, it isn't. Igarashi-san shoved Yoshida-san's shoulder, showing her discontent. Nanami Toko smiled wryly, but sat down without further resistance, to my surprise. Don't mind if I do, then. Have you been friends with Nanami-san for a while? I asked Yoshida-san, as she gave a satisfied grin. Yeah, about a week now. Then they had only just met since we started high school. Sorry, Midori. Nanami Toko gave Igarashi-san a small apology. You're not the one who should apologize, Toko. Igarashi-san gave Yoshida-san's face a little prod. Yoshida-san, meanwhile, seemed to be enjoying her experience sitting on half a chair. This really exercises your stomach muscles. Midori. Yes, I worried over that. It took me a moment to notice Nanami Toko's gaze on me. Is something wrong? I asked. She was peeking at my lunchbox, leaving her own unopened. Her eyes were wide and looked a bit like a child's. I was just a little curious about your lunch, Seki-san. Huh? Oh. I understood why. It probably had to do with our conversation about my family. It's normal, see? I showed my half-eaten lunch to her. Nanami Toko's eyes carefully took in my side dishes and rice, but her eyes didn't glitter, and her mouth remained slack. Maybe he wasn't living up to her expectations. Looks good. What exactly were you hoping it would look like? When I asked Nanami Toko that, she smiled and pulled away without replying, evidently too embarrassed to tell me her silly fantasies. I wondered if the rich weren't supposed to eat rolled omelettes in their lunch. Personally, I would want to have rolled omelettes, whether I was rich or not. That aside, why we were still only calling each other Seki-san and Nanami-san, when she was on a first name, no honorific basis with the others. Something about that bothered me. Was I falling behind? Though I was probably pursuing Nanami Toko in a different way from the rest. Still, Yoshida-san and Igarashi-san were able to have an unconstrained conversation with Nanami Toko. This distressed me. I fretted over whether to call her Toko like the others. I didn't think she would be upset if I did, but I was sure she would think it was abrupt. It was like suddenly jumping into something new, and it was just too difficult for me. I wasn't good at letting my guard down. My thoughts whirled as I moved my hands and mouth mechanically, and ate without tasting much of my lunch. When lunch ended, I tried to naturally call out to Nanami Toko, and she stood up. To... Huh? Nanami Toko turned around. When we made eye contact, my voice withered away. Nothing. Really? All right. Nanami Toko returned to her seat without questioning me further. Uh-huh. When I heard someone's insinuating voice from the side, I turned my head sharply. What? Yoshida-san proudly pointed at me with her konnyaku still picked up in her chopsticks. She hadn't finished her lunch yet. So you're not used to calling people by their first names? When she saw through me, I couldn't immediately deny her. Yoshida-san and Igarashi-san looked at each other and came to some mutual understanding. So that's how it is. Seems like it. Like what? I understood that their remarks were about me, but I couldn't understand what conclusion they had reached. What kind of impression do you get from me? That you're pretty? Igarashi-san narrowed her eyes slightly at that. Was Yoshida-san complimenting me? It occurred to me that they were still both sitting in the same chair. Thank you, I said, although that wasn't what I'd wanted her to tell me. At least, I think. Then how about you use me for practice? Yoshida-san, who had crossed her arms and stretched herself to her full sitting height, looked at me expectantly. Practice what? Isn't it easier talking to me than to Toko? Figure that's how it is. I still wasn't sure what she was implying, but I could at least hazard a guess this time. To be honest, I wasn't very good with people who were so casually about getting familiar with me. But those negative feelings hadn't developed in my conversations with Yoshida Manaka. Maybe it was because she did it so naturally and clearly, without ulterior motives. And so, I didn't think about it too deeply as I said. Manaka. Mm-hmm. She seemed satisfied. Do you mean next? Even Igarashi-san was asking me now. I felt equally comfortable talking to her, so that was fine. Midori. Yo, she's the bomb! Midori exclaimed. She seemed happy. I felt like rather than us getting closer, their reactions had strengthened their bonds with each other. Oh, I should have said that, Manaka interjected. Because you're Yoshida. Yo, she's the bomb! Manaka nodded happily. Igarashi Midori. Oh, that is, Midori, commented tersely. Simpleton. Oh, come on, Manaka protested. There aren't really any gotta good Yoshida puns. That's not the issue. Just hurry up and finish eating, will you? Midori pointed at the corner of the lunchbox. There were 2 konjaku pieces left. Okay. Stuffing her mouth with konjaku, Manaka looked at me. Wait a second. You didn't have any trouble saying that at all. I never said I couldn't do it. I suppose that's true, Manaka easily agreed. Then she swallowed everything in her mouth and nodded firmly. I hope you become close, she added with a smile that didn't seem to have any deep meaning to it. Me too. I wondered if we weren't close now. If we were, what exactly would prove it? Oh, I'm so sick of konjaku. You've only got one more. Just eat it all in one bite. Okay, then open wide. Why me? The chattering pair were the most boisterous in the classroom. I certainly didn't have anything like a familiar relationship that Manaka and Midori had with each other. If anything, they were probably outliers for already being so close after just a week, so they weren't exactly a helpful example. It was unlikely that Nanami Toko and I would bond in the same way. When it came down to it, I'd simply fallen for Nanami Toko at first sight. I'd been walking on air ever since, but my calmer side would bring me back down to earth soon enough. Though I had been so attracted to her that I forgot to consider that Nanami Toko and I were both girls. To the rest of the world, there would surely be an unusual relationship. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant sounding voices of my 2 friends joking around. My troubles and hardships came rushing back all at once, jostling their way into my mind.